Hello to everyone. Thank you as well also for the opportunity to present today into the Mental Health Foundation of Australia. And I also appreciate that my invitation comes off the back of last year there being a national symposium with regards to sports people mental health. And I also am aware of, in the future, we've got Mental Health Month coming up in October. And so appreciate the opportunity and just want to thank yourself and your organisation and similar organisations like you for the great work that gets done in the mental health space. So I'll share my screen and get over to the presentation as you mentioned. If you could just let me know when that comes up. Okay, have you got that?
Yes.
And it's in presentation mode?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful. Okay, so as Christian mentioned, sports or sport and mental health is the title of the presentation today. How's that? I'm just having difficulty here getting the slides now to change.
It's just at the bottom, there's arrows.
Yeah, let's go with that. There we go. Okay. Before I commence, I just wanted to make that declaration of competing interests or no competing interests. Having said that, without wanting to state the obvious, obviously, and it was mentioned in the introduction, I am employed full-time by Cricket Australia. So just wanted to explain why the slides, and obviously they were supportive of, and part of this presentation was developed on their time. So hence the slides that are being used. And as mentioned before, just wanting to say thank you for the opportunity to present on this important topic. Just by way of an agenda, just looking at sport and mental health, discussing and wanting to look at the changing landscape that we're experiencing and have done over the last 10 to 20 years, the benefits of sport with regards to mental health and wellbeing. And I think that's a really important focus for us is looking and proactively looking at and looking to embrace mental health, as opposed to always looking at things from a mental illness perspective, and understanding that mental health isn't necessarily, as we know, just the absence of mental illness. Also, though, looking at the flip side there in sport as it relates to mental ill health, then the opportunities for some leadership and good work to be done with regards to various initiatives and frameworks, how we maintain and lend support to the change that is going on and continue the good work that's going on in this space, and then any questions and discussion. Christian mentioned before, this topic is quite relevant at the moment, given what's been going on with the Olympics and whatnot. And I just wanted to highlight, as you can see in the title there, I've mentioned the changing landscape. So these are literally just a couple of headlines and photos from the last month or two around some really interesting and topical points relating to some fairly high profile sports people. And I should also mention that from the outset, obviously, given my background, I have a bit of an elite sport bent, but there's a lot of what we're going to talk about today can relate to both elite sport and through all levels of sport, all the way down to grassroots for that matter. Now, what's really interesting, and as I mentioned around the changing landscape piece, is that you don't have to look too far nowadays to see some stories relating to mental health and wellbeing regarding sports people. And I see some of this as some really positive change. I only have to think back to my training, even though it is some time ago now, late 90s, and even with regards to sports psychology at the time, generally it came out of either one of two types of disciplines, human movements or purely psychology. And I remember doing some case studies back at the time, and quite often we'd be talking about different athletes and sports people, and in one of these sessions someone raised and said, well, did someone do a fairly comprehensive mental health workup around this, including any investigation with regards to suicidal ideation or anything like that? And it was to some, it seemed like quite a foreign concept, which was really surprising and alarming. And it was almost, I remember a comment, something to the effect of, oh, there wouldn't be any significant mental health issues. They're an athlete. And we know that that's just simply not the case. And so I think some people would look at these headlines and think, gee, there's some significant issues going on and there's some concerns. I look and I think, no, these concerns have quite often been in existence. I look at these from a fairly positive perspective and think it's great that there is greater awareness. We're shining light on particular issues. And one of the changes that I've noticed that I think is really pleasing as well, and that each of these instances or stories have in common, is that each of the athletes in question were specifically willing to reference mental health. And one of the trends that we've seen in the past is more people not feeling terribly comfortable sometimes and would sometimes just refer to maybe personal issues, perhaps well-being. Sometimes it more just being around rest. So if you look at down in the bottom right-hand corner, Liz Cambay, she came out and specifically, initially when she didn't play, this is going back a little while, she was DNP, did not play, and it was referred to as rest. And she came out in the Players' Tribune and actually made a point of saying, no, that should have said did not play, mental health. And I think it's really important and a sign of some good progress that we're willing to use some of that terminology. And I would like to think that it's a reflection of some of the good work that's being done and creating greater cultural and psychological safety in various environments. Looking at sport and, like I said, proactively and positively into mental health and the concept of thriving, if you like. As we know, and I won't labour the points too much, but there's sufficient evidence around linking sport and physical activity with enhanced mental health and wellbeing. That's been well described. Exercise participation, it's really good to see that is also being seen as an integral treatment modality for a wide range of mental health conditions. In addition to a lot of the physical and physiological benefits, there's a number of those psychological benefits that I think it's really important for us to regularly emphasise and leverage around this whole concept of social connection and reducing loneliness and isolation, an increased sense of purpose, having good functional outlets for physical and emotional issues that we may be experiencing at the time, the positive impact on mood and self-esteem, allowing us to have broader and more extended networks of support, having the potential there for access to additional education and resources, and just providing the opportunity for enhanced life balance and complexity that we all know is very important from a personal wellbeing perspective. Two sides to the coin though, and always very important for us to remember, and I've just put elite there in brackets, and the reason for that, as I mentioned, I work into the elite sports space, but elite more than anything sometimes can be more about a state of mind. Just because people aren't performing at a professional level doesn't mean that they don't approach their sport in a very serious and elite type of way. So I'm going to use that term, but as I mentioned, there's a lot of relevance to all of the points being discussed here, whether people see themselves operating in high performance or any level of sport throughout the pathway. So just looking there and saying sport can obviously have a protective and precipitating and perpetuating factors in terms of mental ill health. What we're finding is the prevalence of mental ill health, such as depression, stress, anxiety, are at similar levels and in some cases higher in sporting populations compared to that of the general community. We know obviously there's a significant overlap between the years of particularly elite competition and the primary ages of onset for most mental health disorders. There's multiple and interrelated challenges associated with the hastening professionalisation of female sports. So as you know, particularly here in Australia, there's a lot of emphasis and work going on to developing female sport and the professionalisation of female sports. But that in itself is creating some challenge. And as you develop something, you need to ensure that the underlying infrastructure and support is in place, particularly if people are then trying to balance increasing sporting commitments with also trying to maintain some kind of work or study or other commitments. Emerging research trends suggesting higher incidence in particular issues around risk-taking, some substance use, eating and body images. Personal and sport-related factors, as we know, can combine to trigger episodes of mental illness. And what's really important, and I'm going to keep coming back to a few times throughout the presentation, is the importance of general attitudes. Attitudes to mental health can play a critical role in shaping healthy sporting environments and associated help-seeking behaviour. Looking at sport and mental ill health, we know that sports-related stress associated with ill health can include injury, excessive training and fatigue, any variation of performance difficulties and form. Quite often you'll see maladaptive and unhelpful perfectionism, public and social media scrutiny. So I know even in the lead up to this presentation, someone had already sent through a question with regards to devices and smartphones and things. And so, yes, I do think we have to be very careful, particularly around social media and the impact it's having on some of our sports people and the general community for that matter. Team selection pressures. Quite often there's extensive travel and time away from home and support networks, team dynamic issues and interpersonal conflict, competing interests, as I mentioned before. This whole challenge and issue around a sense of identity and self-worth outside of sport. That was one that was specifically raised just recently around, Simone Biles and her referring to this and her colleagues saying people need to remember that she is a person, and then in being identified as a person, understanding and seeing yourself outside of your sports identity can be a real challenge for some people. Financial uncertainty and career transition, access to support and associated attitudes and stigmas around mental health. And then I put that final one down the bottom, COVID and the associated restrictions and demands, and a little asterisk. That asterisk is there because, my goodness, we could spend the whole day talking about that one. So that's a completely separate session and topic altogether, and but still really worthwhile discussing given the current climate. Another issue that we need to always be really consciously aware of is help-seeking behaviour and some of the challenges associated with that with sporting populations. So we know, particularly in the past, and I think it's a shifting trend again, which again is positive, and we need to understand why and make sure we maintain the momentum and continue to leverage. But in the past, it's indicated that athletes can sometimes be less inclined than the general population to seek support for their mental health. And the reasons they cite are generally around stigma, a personal lack of understanding around mental health themselves, a perception that sometimes practitioners don't necessarily understand their unique sporting context, and a perceived need for mental toughness, where help-seeking may be seen as a sign of weakness. And then along with that, as people transition out of sport, you can sometimes get these issues relating to lifestyle changes, issues regarding to personal and social identity, as I referenced before. Often there'll be chronic injury and sometimes some financial challenges as well. Moving forward then, I think what's really important is again, for all of us, and I think one thing that particularly everyone on the call will appreciate, and I think that most people in the general community are starting to get their head around, is that mental health is everyone's responsibility. And there's great opportunities for good leadership in many ways, not least of which is around some of our players and our player leaders who are willing to champion this space. I've used that example there of Moses Enriques from my sport specifically, and he's been willing in recent times to speak quite publicly about some of the challenges that he faced around his mental health. And I was just able to see the significant impact that had both within our sport and within other sports as well. And it's, like I said, and that's why I highlighted those 3 or 4 stories in the first couple of slides. People being able to, or being willing to come out and speak and highlight, has an incredibly powerful impact and influence on everyone's perception of mental health awareness and literacy and help seeking. So anything we can do to help people step, as I say there, courageously into that mental health space. We need to look to keep shifting those attitudes and creating greater awareness and understanding, normalizing prevalence and the personal experience. So I think it's the personal experience that different people can then relate to, and we get some of these shifts in attitudes. And like I say, they're reducing the stigma towards mental health difficulties, continuing to improve the narrative, encouraging proactivity and help seeking, making sure there's positive messaging and emphasising the benefits of optimal mental health for both physical health and performance, if we're looking at things within a sporting context. And then at a national and international perspective, looking at how do we do better or more targeted research, improve screenings, early identification mechanisms, and tailor the support and referral networks and recovery processes around mental health and wellbeing in sport and for sports people. So just touching on some of that work, there's been some really important work done in recent years. And like I said, there's good momentum and awareness being built. So this infographic just relates to some really important work done by the IOC in the lead up to, Tokyo Olympics, just around, again, elite mental health or mental health in elite athletes, and just trying to create greater awareness around prevalence, around potential consequences, the particular conditions. And that's by no means exhaustive there in the middle on the left-hand side. And then also down the bottom, okay, what can we be doing to more effectively manage mental health conditions in sport? Looking at the contributing factors and issues, optimising training and competition environments, looking to build awareness and education, having multidisciplinary approaches. And they took it to another level then. They took the next step, and as part of that process and the working group that they'd pulled together, just started looking at future directions. And again, as I mentioned before, so in this case, this is a little more tailored to elite and to Olympic athletes and those types of sports. But again, there's a number of key themes here that have relevance to sport in general. So be that around, the ease of access, be that around greater understanding and research, be that around emerging trends. As it highlights there, we know that there's a burgeoning area of interest and concern around concussion and mental health in sport, be it around treatment and management and return from injury, decreasing the stigma of help seeking with regards to mental health issues in elite sports, all the way down to the final point down the bottom there, number 13, around empowering and educating coaches and athletes and other stakeholders, to create environments that support mental health, wellness and help seeking. And as it says there, then down the bottom on the right-hand side, making sure that mental health assessment and management should be as commonplace as accessing any other type of mental health care. And if we can keep moving towards that, then we're certainly moving in the right direction. Similarly, around the same time, the ISSP, so the International Society of Sports Psychology, conducted an international think tank, and they are also looking at, what can be done to improve, mental health in high performance athletes. And again, they came up with a number of propositions that you can see there and some recommendations. And it will, it won't come as any surprise. There's good consistency there around, what was being looked at from an IOC perspective, and the ISSP then around mental health needs to be seen as a core component of a culture of excellence. So within any kind of sporting organisation, if we're trying to be the best we can be, then how are we promoting a mentally healthy environment? How do we make sure we better understand the demands and what mental health looks like within sporting contexts? How do we support different forms of research and screening, making sure that athlete mental health is seen as a major resource throughout the whole, for athletes holistically and throughout their career and post-career from a sporting perspective. Understanding that sporting environments can both nourish and malnourish mental health. Being aware of what the components are then that nourish and malnourish, but make sure we're working proactively into that positive space. And understanding, as I mentioned before, that mental health is everyone's business. And where we can, though, it could be overseen by one or two individuals within various sporting organisations with specific expertise and training. So just there with regards to their recommendations, they were talking about understanding and researchers developing more contextualised definitions of athlete and sporting mental health. Researchers and sporting organisations investigating sustainable sports environments and the important role of mental health support personnel, and just recognising that athlete mental health as a core component of a healthy sports system and the key indicators of their effectiveness, and supporting research initiatives and promoting good mental health literacy for all of their players and stakeholders. A little bit closer to home, the people at Origin, and I mention Origin specifically, we've been lucky enough at cricket to engage in 3 really comprehensive cycles of mental health and wellbeing research with our sport, and looking at how best we address some of the issues and promote mental health and good mental health practices as best we can. So they're in the process at the moment of developing a national sport mental health framework, and it's an evidence-informed framework, and it's emphasising good promotion, so managing and continuing to maintain the cultural shift, prevention, so developing greater mental health literacy and proactive factors, early intervention and treatment and recovery. So looking there to provide Australian sporting bodies with guidelines and standards, assisting organisations to develop or enhance their mental health policies and practices for all stakeholders, and building the capacity of Australian sports to create environments that are conducive to thriving, as we mentioned before. And by that, we're talking about good mental health and wellbeing, along with optimal physical health and performance. And Associate Professor or Professor Purcell in the past has mentioned that you can see the ecological systems model for elite athlete mental health there on the side, just talking about, starting at the core there, looking at the athlete and their various coping skills and attitudes, broadening out to the micro system. How do we help inform and educate coaches, caregivers, relatives, friends, and our high performance medical staff? The exo system then, so the individual sport, and then more broadly out to that macro system. There's also some really important work being done around, as I've mentioned a few times, the shifting of attitudes, and Simon Rice at Origin is also doing some really important work around this piece and the development of a measure, the athlete attitudes to mental health in sport setting. And as I've put there, it creates a really good opportunity for us and a potential mechanism and process for creating and maintaining psychological safe environments. So what I mean by that is that, as you know, sometimes people can do a lot of work and there can be a lot of emphasis and effort put in to try and shift a dynamic, but it has to be felt and received and perceived at the consumer level. Are we seeing the shift that we're desiring at the organisational level? And so this measure is looking to work into a couple of key areas there, and you can see that within the table. So making sure that we're trying to achieve a low perceived career impact. So what that means is if I'm a sports person or an athlete, for example, or another stakeholder in an environment, but experiencing something from a mental health and wellbeing perspective, is it perceived that the from a mental health perspective, that it will impact my position in the team or performance or income or longevity. So am I comfortable that because I may experience something from a mental health and wellbeing perspective, it's not going to jeopardize me and my role too much? Do I have good mental health awareness? So do I have a good understanding of the mental health signs and symptoms? Do I know when and where to seek assistance? Do I feel there's good disclosure safety? As in, it would be safe for me to share what I'm experiencing within my sport environment. And people within my sport setting would be supportive and take my mental health issue seriously. And how are we working into that low stigma space? Having a mental health issue, would it reflect poorly on me in my sports setting, i.e. as a sense of weakness? So I think, like I said, there's a really important opportunity, and it's certainly something I'm going to be looking to do in the sport that I'm involved in, is being able to assess how we're tracking along these areas so that we know how our sports people and various stakeholders are going, but being able to feed back into various levels of the organisation, this is how we're being perceived. Because if we can start to use evidence to drive some of the work we're doing and how we're being perceived, again, I think you're bringing both parts of the model together, and we're moving in the right direction in this space. I just wanted to use a couple of other ways that different areas are doing this and getting some really good work done. So again, literally just doing a couple of searches in recent times. Unfortunately, there was a local footy club up here in Brisbane that lost a young person to a mental health related issue, and they've just created a club initiative with regards to this push-up challenge. But you can see how well supported it is there. It's bringing the community together. It's particularly saying to young people that we're willing to talk about this. We're willing to shed a light on these issues. This is a safe and supportive environment. And trying to encourage continual progress in this space. Similarly, this coming weekend, you can see there 14th of August down Adelaide Way, with the breakthrough community round. And again, just creating awareness in different community-based clubs and sports around increasing awareness and the different avenues for mental health literacy, support seeking, proactivity in this space. So again, anything like I said, all the way through the system, if clubs can be aware of these types of initiatives and look at their different activities and partnerships to keep promoting the good work that's being done around the place in the mental health and wellbeing space. I just wanted to add this slide in because, again, I think it shows some good progress that's being made. I wanted to include it because I really love I know that Pat Rafter, for example, is a really popular and highly regarded sports identity in Australia. I also love that his willingness to speak really openly. And in that, I think a number of people can relate or like to relate to Pat in some ways. Now, this quote that I've taken, he appeared on the project going back a couple of months. And it was in relation to when Naomi Osaka had come out, and it was before she stepped out of the French Open. So she'd stepped away from doing her media conferences, and that had caused obviously some stories, and they got Pat on. And this is before she then withdrew from the tournament. And it was just fascinating. He made a quote while on the program just to say, when someone says there's a mental health issue, I don't know where to go with it. Because in the past, 5 to 10 years ago, I just would have said harden up and get on with it. I'm trying to take a different stance now. Now, to me, that's incredibly powerful. So I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation that there is a changing landscape. And that's why I put in the title of this slide, we need now to navigate a path through the changing landscape. And as I said, I think Pat would probably reflect the views and opinions of a number of people in sport. So the fact that he's willing to kind of say, hang on a minute, okay, this is changing. I used to react a particular way, but now I'm trying to have a better understanding. Now I'm trying to take a different stance here, as I think a number of people are. But I also think a number of people would look at it and kind of go, I just don't know where to go, or I'm not exactly sure. So that's the beauty and the power of these different initiatives that are going on for sessions like this, the willingness for people to engage in this space. How do we harness that shift? How do we harness the good work that's being done? How do we harness key people willing to say, I'm now trying to take a different stance? And how do we help create a pathway for them to know where to go with that and to continue that good work and momentum? And so, as mentioned before, some really important work, just around the whole promotion. So be that club-wide policies and programs, partnerships, resources, guest speakers, mental health awareness events, teachable moments, the prevention piece, making sure we're trying to work into that strengths-based approach for our athletes, the mastery approach, growth mindset, maximising life experiences, capacity building, developing cognitive and emotional flexibility, stress and coping exercises, and being willing to stress and reflect and debrief and support and develop our people. And then making sure there's clarity around, okay, if we're identifying, what does the early intervention piece look like? Do we have good clarity in our club, in our association? Are our stakeholders and players really well informed, and are they supported? Do they feel like this environment encourages proactivity, will take any kind of step or work into this space seriously, and that they feel really well supported, and that, like I said, it is a culturally and psychologically safe environment? Thank you. Okay.